In this final presentation, I'd like to review what I think are some key points and takeaways from the course. I'll try to be brief. And this review should help you to prepare for the final, but also to reflect on how the tools and ideas we've explored here might be of some use to you beyond the course. Here I'm going to run quickly through the 9 previous modules and bring up a couple of key points from each. So in this course, we looked at cultural anthropology and the culture concept, diversity, globalization, and multiculturalism, histories of diversity and immigration, race and ethnicity, class, spatial diversity and borderlands, gender and sexuality, language and culture, and religious diversity. And also, you did some ethnography, which I think is a useful way to look at diversity on the ground, and we read Lawrence Ralph's powerful ethnography, Renegade Dreams. In Module 1, we explored the culture concept, and I'll just remind you that culture is a complex whole of ideas, meanings, behaviors, material objects, and language. One useful way of thinking about culture and how culture shapes us as individuals or selves is what Marcus and Connor call the culture cycle, composed of I's, interactions, institutions, and ideas. Each of these is interrelated, from the broad ideas that inform culture to the institutions within which we operate and our daily interactions with other people that shape us. This model raises questions about the relationship between culture and individual actors, which I think is an interesting way to think about anthropology and how we are. Again, what do you think are the major ideas or worldviews that have shaped the institutions you operate in, your daily interactions, and ultimately yourself? I also want to recall David Haynes's approach to culture, which he called Adaptations, Structures, and Meanings, the title of an introductory textbook that has just been republished. I've adapted this to materialist, social, and interpretive approaches to culture. Recall that materialist approaches examine how people adapt to specific natural and cultural environments, how they use technology, and how they make a living. They also explore relations of production, or how different groups of people within society gain access to resources. Such access in the contemporary world leads to concentration of wealth and also social inequality, a key dimension of the study of diversity in the United States and globally. Social approaches focus on social systems or institutions that organize society: kinship and family, gender, race and ethnicity, class, politics, economics, key ways in which human beings organize social life. And third, the interpretive approach asks us to look at systems of meaning. So another key way that communities create and express meaning is through symbols or symbolic activity. And this includes language, which is, of course, a symbolic system of communication, as well as religious and ritual activity. Because UH culture is a complex system, this leads to great cultural diversity, which can be interpreted by anthropologists and yourselves now. Finally, in Module 1, we read Horace Minor's humorous take on Nasarima body ritual. Through humor, this article asked us to look at our own cultural system and practices as exotic. By turning the anthropological gaze ironically on ourselves, Minor also reminds us of the hazards of ethnocentrism. Nonetheless, Nasarima ritual expresses worldview through how we view the body. In Module 2, Diversity, Globalization, and Multiculturalism, we turn to the question of diversity in the United States. In the US, we manage our complex diversity in multiple ways, while also trying to balance competing values of individual freedom, membership in various and often competing groups, wealth accumulation, and equality. Diversity includes race, ethnicity, class, gender and sexuality, religion, geographic location, age, which we didn't really have time to look at very well here, and mental and physical ability. The diversity wheel helps us to visualize our diversity. As the Johns Hopkins Diversity Leadership Council puts it, the center of the wheel represents internal dimensions that are usually most permanent or visible. The outside of the wheel represents dimensions that are acquired and change over the course of a lifetime. The combinations of all these dimensions influence our values, beliefs, behaviors, experiences, and expectations, and make us all unique as individuals. In Module 2, we also looked at globalization, which involves the increasing interconnections and movement of finance or money, goods, information, and people. Globalization has impacted U.S. cultural diversity in multiple ways. Here are a couple. Globalization of industrial production, which has led to the offshoring or disappearance of many well-paying jobs in manufacturing. This in turn has led to increased inequality and growing frustrations among the working class. The increasing diversity of immigrant populations in the United States is another way that globalization influences cultural diversity. Western Europe now sends fewer immigrants than other regions, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And finally, globalization has not led to uniformity, but to a reconfiguration of difference across the world and in the U.S. As we saw in Module 2, multiculturalism is both a way of describing culturally and ethnically diverse societies, such as the U.S., and a project, right? So both a descriptive term and a project for promoting inclusion, respect for, and recognition of the claims of cultural groups that have often been marginalized and excluded. Multiculturalism has also been highly controversial, in part because it seeks to decenter dominant culture by arguing that all cultures in a nation have value and should be counted. Multiculturalism has been accused of essentializing group identities and fostering identity politics over hybrid and individual social identities. It's also been accused of advocating separatism and division over national unity. At the same time, advocates of multiculturalism argue that such accusations serve the interests of those already in power while excluding marginalized groups. The point here is that diversity and multiculturalism pose a threat to some sectors of society. For me, the takeaway is that multiculturalism fuels many of our cultural and political debates today over immigration, religious differences, inclusion, and exclusion. Whatever our political bent, being aware of this controversial dimension can make us more attentive to multiple points of view in our diverse society, whether we agree or not. Module 3 looked at the histories of diversity and immigration in the U.S. To review, I'd like to make 2 points. First, I'd like to return to the short excerpt we read from Ronald Takaki's A Different Mirror, A History of Multicultural America. Takaki reminds us that the U.S. has always been a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial society. He seeks to understand the contribution, oppression, and resistance of African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, as well as working class Irish, Italians, Poles, and East European Jews, among others. He also explores the historical relationship between class and race, a theme touched on at multiple points in the course. As a Japanese American whose grandfather came to Hawaii to work on sugarcane plantations, Takaki asks what happens when you read the history of your society and you're not in it. As an anthropologist teaching a diversity course, what I'd like to stress here is the importance of listening attentively to multiple stories and voices that go back to the original settlement of this nation in ways that broaden our dominant European ancestry and ideas rooted in Western civilization. Listening to such stories completes us, complicates our messy world, and makes us more human and more humane. Listening to such diverse stories and trying to understand the cultural logics they express is central to anthropology. The second key point in this module has to do with immigration and immigration debates that are part of both our past and our present. In Module 3, I tried to provide a very incomplete introduction to the history of immigration and changing immigration policy, in part to provide some background to the contentious debates of the present. Again, regardless of how we might feel about the wall or those illegals, anthropology teaches us to listen to the voices and stories of immigrants, but also, I'd add, to those of people opposed to immigration and immigrants. Many of us dismiss the complexity of immigration issues with statements like, "I just want them to obey the law." But as Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti has put it, we need to fix our broken immigration system and to turn out more citizens instead of creating more criminals. Module 4 looked at race and ethnicity, perhaps the two core elements of cultural diversity in the United States. Our readings looked at colorblind privilege and the racialized impact of the war on drugs, which, according to legal scholar Michelle Alexander, led to mass incarceration of mostly nonviolent drug offenders of color. As I see it, the entire course could easily have been focused on an expanded Module 4. Ethnicity, and especially race, remain at the center of diversity issues in the United States, even if some of us claim not even to see race. But instead of repeating this module, I'd like to talk very briefly about artist, performer, and author Damali Ayo's pamphlet, "I Can Fix It, Racism." Ayo lists the things that white people and black people can do to fix racism. Let me talk about these very briefly. I encourage you to find Ayo's pamphlet online and to read it for more details. But briefly, based on a survey of 2,000 people, she asks white people to, 1, admit it. The first step is admitting you have race. Here, let's take race to mean a cultural or social construct. It also means admitting that racism exists. And Ayo asks us to observe how others are treated. 2, listen. As one person put it, I've found that really listening to people of color and believing their experience is eye-opening. 3, educate yourself. Seriously, Ayo says, read a book or get on the net. 4, broaden your experience. Spend time with people without interrogating them. And 5, take action. Always confront racism, ignorance, and inappropriate behavior or language when you see it, hear it, read it, or experience it. She also advises people of color. First, get real. It's not that easy being a citizen of color. 2, speak out. Remember that you're not powerless. Talk to white people. 3, educate yourself. You do not have to teach white people, but you do have to educate yourself and other people of color, she puts it. 4, build ties. There's power in numbers. Learn about other people of color outside your group. And interestingly, she suggests reading A Different Mirror by Ronald Takaki. And 5, take care. Racism and combating it take their toll. Module 5 dealt with class or socioeconomic status. Let me make just a couple of points about class. First, in one of the presentations, several anthropologists point to our tendency to deny class or our collective unwillingness to talk about class, or the widespread idea that we're all just middle class. Part of this reluctance may stem from the ideology of individual success and the growing economic inequalities that characterize our society. Our cultural emphasis on individualism may also hamper our ability to see class. At the same time, Kotek and Kozaitis suggest that we frequently use class labels such as the rich, the homeless, rednecks, white trash, the working poor, right, to talk at least indirectly about class. As you move beyond this course, I'd ask you to remain attentive to the way we speak indirectly and symbolically about class. In other words, how does class operate in the discourses we use and the symbolic meanings and metaphors we use? We may also individualize class, for example, when we call someone well-dressed or trashy, right? We pin it on the individual rather than class. We may also experience class through our fears of others who are different from us or who live in different neighborhoods. Another point from this module has to do with the intersection of race and class, which came up in the readings. Kirby Moss experienced this when he attended a high school basketball game or encountered resentment in a white working-class bar. John Hartigan noted the attitudes of white middle-class residents of Detroit when, quote, hillbillies, that is, white people who didn't act like proper white folks, began to move into the neighborhood. In Butler County, where I live, much of the disdain for and fear of Hamilton and Middletown are related, I think, to this intersection of race and class. In Module 6, we turn to spatial diversity and cultural borderlands. Here, I argued that cultural diversity in the United States is spatial or spatialized. By being more attentive to cultural landscapes, rural, urban, suburban, we can see how these different spaces both reflect and produce cultural diversity. We can also use ideas of spatial diversity to look at divisions between neighborhoods, for example, in our cities. Borders and cultural borderlands help us to visualize not only divisions, but hybridity or mixing in how social actors cross, uphold, and challenge cultural borders. We looked at some powerful examples of student writing, and I also asked you to write ethnographic observations on borders and borderlands. Like Randall McGuire's Steel Walls, borders are physical and material, but also symbolic. Module 7 turned to sex, gender, and sexuality. According to Marcus and Connor, who proposed the culture cycle introduced in Module 1, women have made important strides in the job market and education. And I quote here, women now hold more managerial and professional jobs than men, and urban women under 30 now make more money than their unmarried and childless male counterparts. Women earn more bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees than men, and many are more professional degrees in most fields. At the same time, men continue to dominate at the highest levels of government, corporations, and academia, as well as in physics and engineering, the most lucrative of the sciences. Finally, women still earn only 77 cents to a man's dollar. The point here is that gender relations have changed considerably in the U.S., but are still a work in progress.